Before I could even smell the smoky aroma of grilled burgers drifting through the afternoon air, I knew this Saturday was going to change everything. If you've ever witnessed injustice unfold right before your eyes, if you've ever seen someone's world completely flip upside down in a matter of minutes, then you need to hear this story. And if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, do it now because what you're about to hear will leave you speechless. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single detail of what happened in Maplewood Park that day. The sun hung high over Maplewood Park, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured grass where families gathered every weekend. Children's laughter echoed from the playground while the gentle hum of conversation mixed with the sizzling sounds of barbecues. It was the kind of peaceful Saturday afternoon that made you believe in the goodness of community, the kind of day where neighbors became friends and strangers shared smiles. But sometimes, beneath the surface of suburban tranquility, prejudice lurks like a venomous snake waiting to strike. Marcus Johnson adjusted the grill grate one more time, his weathered hands moving with the practiced precision of someone who had been perfecting his barbecue technique for decades. At 52, Marcus carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had worked hard for everything he owned. His salt and pepper beard framed a face that told stories of struggle and triumph, and his eyes held the warmth of someone who believed in treating every person with respect. Today, he wore his favorite navy blue polo shirt and khaki shorts, looking every bit the successful businessman he had become, though few people in this upscale neighborhood knew his story. Beside him, his wife Angela arranged colorful paper plates on the picnic table they had claimed near the pavilion. Angela, 48, moved with the grace of a woman who had learned to navigate both boardrooms and backyard gatherings with equal confidence. Her natural hair was styled in elegant locks that caught the sunlight, and her bright yellow sundress seemed to radiate the same warmth as her infectious smile. She hummed softly as she worked, occasionally glancing over at Marcus with the kind of look that spoke of 30 years of marriage built on love, respect, and shared dreams. Their son David, 25 and fresh out of business school, was setting up a portable speaker while their daughter Jasmine, 22 and home from her final year of college, helped her grandmother settle into a comfortable lawn chair. 3 generations of the Johnson family had gathered to celebrate what they thought would be a simple family barbecue. But fate had other plans brewing in the summer heat. Can you picture it? Can you feel the anticipation in the air? The way a perfect day can suddenly take an unexpected turn? Hold that image in your mind because what happened next would test everything this family believed about justice, dignity, and the power of perseverance. About 50 yards away, Karen Mitchell stood at her kitchen window, her manicured fingers gripping the edge of the granite countertop until her knuckles turned white. At 45, Karen had spent the last 20 years climbing the social ladder of Maplewood's elite circles, and she wore her status like armor. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled in a bob that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month, and her designer athleisure outfit screamed expensive taste. But behind her carefully applied makeup, her blue eyes burned with an ugly mixture of entitlement and barely concealed racism that she had learned to disguise as concern for property values and neighborhood standards. Karen had moved to Maplewood 5 years ago after her divorce settlement left her financially comfortable but emotionally bitter. She had purchased a beautiful colonial home in the most exclusive section of the neighborhood, and she took pride in being what she called a guardian of community standards. In reality, Karen was the kind of person who called the homeowners association about grass that grew half an inch too tall, and who had memorized every city ordinance that she could use as a weapon against people she deemed undesirable. As she watched the Johnson family through her window, Karen felt that familiar surge of indignation that had become her constant companion. How dare they? She thought, her jaw clenching as she observed Marcus flipping burgers with obvious skill and enjoyment. This is supposed to be a family neighborhood, not some kind of public gathering space for people who don't belong here. The fact that the Johnsons were clearly a loving, well-dressed, respectable family didn't register in Karen's prejudiced mind. All she saw was an opportunity to flex her perceived authority and make these people understand that they needed to know their place. Karen had been watching the Johnson family for the past hour, her resentment building with each passing minute. She had convinced herself that they were violating some rule, some regulation that would justify her intervention. The truth was, the Johnsons had every right to be in the public park. They had obtained the proper permits for their family gathering, and they were being respectful, quiet neighbors. But Karen's worldview didn't allow for such nuances. In her mind, Certain people belonged in certain places, and she had appointed herself the enforcer of those unwritten rules. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her contacts, her finger hovering over the number for the Maplewood Police Department. Karen had called the police on neighbors before, always managing to frame her complaints in terms of noise violations or permit issues, carefully avoiding language that would reveal her true motivations. She had become expert at weaponizing the system, using her privilege and the benefit of the doubt that officers typically gave to well-dressed white women in expensive neighborhoods. But today, Karen was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Today, she was about to discover that the universe has a way of humbling those who think they can treat others as less than human. Today, she was about to learn that the very people she was trying to intimidate held more power than she could possibly imagine. Meanwhile, Marcus had no idea that he was being watched with such malicious intent. He was focused on the simple pleasure of spending time with his family, something that had become precious to him over the years as his business responsibilities had grown more demanding. As the founder and CEO of Johnson Property Solutions, Marcus had built an empire from nothing, starting with a single rental property he had purchased with his life savings 25 years ago. Through hard work, smart investments, and an unwavering commitment to treating people fairly, he had grown his company into one of the largest property management firms in the tri-state area. What made Marcus's success even more remarkable was the obstacles he had overcome to achieve it. Growing up in a working-class family, he had been the first in his family to attend college, working multiple jobs to pay for his education while maintaining a perfect GPA. After graduation, he had faced rejection after rejection from traditional employers who couldn't see past the color of his skin to recognize his talent and determination. So Marcus had decided to create his own opportunities, starting with that first rental property and a vision of building something that would provide for his family and create jobs for others. Angela had been his partner in every sense of the word, working alongside him in the early days when they operated the business from their kitchen table. She had a natural gift for reading people and understanding what motivated them, skills that had proven invaluable as the company grew and they began managing properties for high net worth clients. Together, they had built a reputation for excellence, integrity, and results that had attracted some of the most prestigious property owners in the region. But success hadn't changed who they were at their core. Marcus and Angela still believed in the importance of family, community, and treating every person with dignity and respect. They had raised their children to understand that privilege came with responsibility, and that their success meant nothing if they didn't use it to lift others up. Today's barbecue was a celebration of those values, a simple gathering that represented everything they held dear. David was telling his grandmother about his new job at a nonprofit organization that provided financial literacy education to underserved communities, while Jasmine shared her plans to attend law school with a focus on civil rights advocacy. The conversation flowed easily between 3 generations, each building on the wisdom and experiences of the others. This was the Johnson family at their best, connected, supportive, and committed to making a positive difference in the world. As Marcus flipped the burgers one final time, he noticed a police car pulling into the parking lot near the pavilion. He didn't think much of it at first. Officers often patrolled the park on weekends to ensure families felt safe. But something about the deliberate way the car approached their area made him pause, a familiar knot forming in his stomach that he had hoped he would never feel again. Officer Rodriguez stepped out of the patrol car, his hand instinctively resting on his radio as he surveyed the scene. At 38, Rodriguez had been with the Maplewood Police Department for 15 years, and he had responded to enough of these calls to recognize the pattern. A concerned citizen reports suspicious activity or noise complaints, and 9 times out of 10, the suspicious activity turns out to be people of color, existing in spaces where someone thinks they don't belong. Rodriguez was a good cop, the kind who had joined the force because he genuinely wanted to serve and protect his community. He was also a man of color himself, which meant he understood both sides of these encounters in ways that many of his colleagues couldn't. As he approached the Johnson family's picnic area, he was already preparing himself for what he suspected would be another unnecessary confrontation born of prejudice and privilege. Marcus set down his grilling tongs and walked toward the officer, his movements calm and deliberate. He had learned long ago that sudden movements or defensive postures could escalate situations that were already tense. Angela noticed the interaction and quietly moved closer, while David and Jasmine exchanged worried glances that their grandmother pretended not to see. "Good afternoon, officer," Marcus said, his voice steady and respectful. "Is there something we can help you with today?" Officer Rodriguez studied Marcus's face, noting the genuine confusion and slight concern in his expression. This wasn't the demeanor of someone who was causing trouble or breaking rules. This was the reaction of a man who was genuinely puzzled about why a police officer was approaching his family gathering. "Good afternoon, sir," Rodriguez replied, his tone professional but not hostile. "I received a complaint about a large gathering in the park. Do you have a permit for this event?" Marcus reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet, extracting a folded piece of paper that he handed to the officer. "We absolutely do," he said with a slight smile. "My wife is very thorough about these things. We applied for the permit 3 weeks ago for a family barbecue." Rodriguez unfolded the paper and examined it carefully. The permit was legitimate, properly filled out and stamped by the Parks Department. It authorized the Johnson family to use the pavilion area for a private gathering of up to 25 people. Rodriguez counted the family members present and came up with exactly 7 people, well within the permitted limit. "Everything looks to be in order here," Rodriguez said, handing the permit back to Marcus. "Mind if I ask what the nature of the complaint was?" Before Marcus could respond, Karen Mitchell came striding across the grass toward them, her designer sneakers clicking against the pavement with each determined step. She had watched the police car arrive with satisfaction, assuming that the officer would quickly disperse what she had reported as an unauthorized gathering. But as she got closer and realized that the conversation seemed cordial rather than confrontational, her confidence began to waver. "Officer," Karen called out as she approached, slightly out of breath from her brisk walk across the park. "Thank goodness you're here. I'm the one who called about this situation." Rodriguez turned to face Karen, immediately noting the contrast between her agitated demeanor and the calm, respectful attitude of the Johnson family. In his experience, the person making the complaint was often more worked up than the people they were complaining about, and this situation seemed to fit that pattern perfectly. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, keeping his voice neutral, "can you tell me specifically what your complaint is about?" Karen gestured toward the Johnson family with barely concealed disdain. "They've been here for hours making noise and taking up space that other families should be able to use. This is supposed to be a quiet family park, not some kind of party venue. I pay taxes in this community, and I have a right to enjoy the park without having to deal with this kind of disruption." Marcus felt Angela's hand slip into his, a gesture of solidarity that gave him strength. He had heard these kinds of coded complaints before, the way certain people used words like disruption and noise to mask their real objections. But he also knew that responding with anger would only make the situation worse, so he took a deep breath and chose his words carefully. "Officer," Marcus said, his voice remaining calm despite the obvious insult he had just endured. "As you can see from our permit, we have every right to be here. We've been respectful of other park users, we've kept our music at a reasonable volume, and we've been cleaning up after ourselves. I'm not sure what disruption this woman is referring to." Karen's face flushed red as she realized that her complaint was falling apart under scrutiny. The Johnson family was clearly well within their rights, and the officer seemed to be taking their side. But rather than backing down, Karen doubled down on her position, her true feelings beginning to show through the veneer of civic concern. "Look at this setup," she said, her voice rising slightly. "This isn't a simple family picnic. They've got professional-grade equipment, multiple tables, and they're obviously planning to be here all day. This kind of thing belongs in private spaces, not in a public park where decent families are trying to enjoy a quiet afternoon." The word decent hung in the air like a poison cloud, and everyone present understood exactly what Karen meant by it. Officer Rodriguez felt his jaw tighten as he recognized the racist undertones in her complaint, while Marcus and Angela exchanged a look that spoke volumes about the discrimination they had faced throughout their lives. But here's where the story takes its first unexpected turn, because Karen Mitchell had no idea who she was really dealing with. She saw a black family enjoying a barbecue and assumed they were people she could intimidate and dismiss. She had no way of knowing that Marcus Johnson was not just any successful businessman, but someone whose influence extended far beyond what she could imagine. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez said, his patience clearly wearing thin, "I've reviewed their permit and everything appears to be completely legal and appropriate. The family has been respectful and quiet, and I don't see any basis for your complaint. Unless you can point to a specific violation of park rules or city ordinances, I'm going to have to ask you to let these folks enjoy their family gathering in peace." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water as she struggled to find another angle of attack. She wasn't used to being dismissed, especially not by a police officer who was supposed to be on her side. In her worldview, her complaint should have been enough to send these people packing, and the fact that it wasn't working was both confusing and infuriating. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered, her composure finally beginning to crack. "I know my rights as a taxpayer and a resident of this community. These people don't belong here, and everyone knows it. Why are you protecting them instead of listening to a concerned citizen?" The mask was finally off, and Karen's true feelings were on full display for everyone to see. Officer Rodriguez took a step back, his hand moving instinctively toward his radio as he prepared to document what was clearly becoming a harassment situation. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, his voice now carrying a warning tone, "I'm going to need you to lower your voice and step back. You're becoming disruptive, and if you continue to harass this family, I'm going to have to consider issuing you a citation for disturbing the peace." Karen's eyes widened in shock and outrage. She couldn't believe that the situation had turned against her so completely. In her mind, she was the victim here, the concerned citizen who was being persecuted for trying to maintain community standards. The idea that she might be the one in trouble was so foreign to her experience that she couldn't process it. But Marcus Johnson was about to give her something much bigger to process. As he watched Karen's meltdown unfold, he made a decision that would change everything. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. Then he placed a call that would send shockwaves through Karen's carefully constructed world. "Hello, Jennifer," Marcus said into the phone, his voice carrying the authority of someone who was used to being listened to. "This is Marcus Johnson. I need you to pull up the file on the Maplewood Gardens property management contract." "Yes, that's right. The one we just acquired last month. I need you to tell me who the current property manager is for 1247 Elm Street." Karen felt a chill run down her spine as she heard her address mentioned in the phone conversation. How could this man possibly know where she lived? And why was he talking about property management contracts? A terrible suspicion began to form in the back of her mind, but she pushed it away. It had to be a coincidence. There was no way this black man grilling burgers in the park could have any connection to her professional life. Marcus listened to the voice on the other end of the phone, nodding occasionally as he received the information he had requested. When the call ended, he looked directly at Karen with an expression that was equal parts amusement and disappointment. "Karen Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone present pay attention. 1247 Elm Street, Unit 3B. Lease signed 18 months ago through Prestige Property Management. Is that correct? Karen's face went white as the blood drained from her cheeks. How could he possibly know those details about her living situation? And why did the name of her property management company sound familiar in a way that made her stomach turn? "How do you know that information?" she whispered. Her earlier bravado completely evaporated. Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. It was the smile of someone who had just realized they held all the cards in a game their opponent didn't even know they were playing. "Because Karen, 3 weeks ago, Johnson Property Solutions acquired Prestige Property Management and all of their contracts, which means, as of last Monday, I am your new landlord." The words hit Karen like a physical blow, and she actually staggered backward as the full implications of what Marcus had just said began to sink in. The man she had just tried to humiliate and drive from the park, the man she had called the police on because she thought he didn't belong in her neighborhood, was now in control of her housing situation. Officer Rodriguez watched the exchange with growing amazement. In 15 years of police work, he had never seen a situation flip so dramatically or so quickly. The woman who had been so confident in her authority just minutes ago now looked like she was about to faint. But wait, there's more to this story that will absolutely blow your mind. If you're enjoying this incredible turn of events, make sure you hit that like button and leave a comment telling me what you think Karen's reaction should be. Because what happens next is going to test everything you think you know about justice and consequences. Angela Johnson had been watching the entire exchange with a mixture of pride and concern. She was proud of her husband for handling the situation with such grace and dignity, but she was also concerned about the implications of what had just been revealed. As a successful businesswoman in her own right, Angela understood the delicate balance between personal satisfaction and professional responsibility. "Marcus," she said quietly, placing a gentle hand on his arm, "maybe we should discuss this privately." But Marcus was just getting started. For too many years, he had been forced to swallow his pride and accept disrespect in the name of keeping the peace. Today, in front of his family and in the place where he had every right to be, he was not going to let this woman's prejudice go unchallenged. "No, Angela," he said, his voice firm but not angry. "I think this conversation needs to happen right here, right now. Ms. Mitchell needs to understand exactly what kind of person she's been dealing with." Karen's mind was racing as she tried to process the catastrophic turn of events. Just minutes ago, she had been the one with power, the concerned citizen calling the authorities to deal with people she considered beneath her. Now she was face to face with the man who controlled her housing, and she had just revealed herself to be exactly the kind of person no landlord wanted as a tenant. "This can't be happening," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. "This has to be some kind of mistake." Marcus pulled out his phone again and showed Karen a document on the screen. It was the acquisition agreement between Johnson Property Solutions and Prestige Property Management, complete with official signatures and legal seals. "No mistake, Karen," he said. "Johnson Property Solutions now owns and manages over 300 properties in this area, including the building where you live. And as the CEO of the company, I take a very personal interest in the kind of tenants we house." The implications of Marcus's words were becoming clearer by the minute, and Karen felt her world beginning to crumble around her. She had spent years building her reputation as a respectable member of the community, and now she was facing the possibility that her own prejudice might cost her everything. Officer Rodriguez was still processing what he had witnessed. In all his years of responding to these kinds of calls, he had never seen such a complete reversal of power dynamics. The woman who had called the police expecting them to remove a black family from the park was now discovering that she had just confronted one of the most successful businessmen in the region. "Sir," Rodriguez said to Marcus, clearly struggling to find the right words, "I apologize for any inconvenience this situation may have caused you and your family. Based on what I've observed here today, it's clear that Miss Mitchell's complaint was without merit." Marcus nodded graciously. "Officer Rodriguez, you handled this situation exactly as you should have. You checked our permits, you listened to both sides, and you made a fair assessment based on the facts. That's all anyone can ask for." But Karen wasn't ready to accept defeat. As the initial shock began to wear off, it was replaced by a desperate anger that made her even more dangerous. She had built her entire identity around the belief that she was superior to people like the Johnson family, and having that belief challenged so dramatically was more than her fragile ego could handle. "This is harassment," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "You can't use your business position to intimidate me because I exercised my rights as a citizen. I'll file a complaint with the housing authority. I'll contact my lawyer. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are." Marcus looked at Karen with something approaching pity. Even now, faced with the consequences of her own actions, she couldn't see past her prejudice to understand what had really happened here. "Karen," he said, his voice patient but firm, "let me explain something to you. You didn't exercise your rights as a citizen today. You weaponized the police against a black family who was doing nothing wrong, hoping that your privilege would be enough to drive us away from a place where we had every right to be. That's not citizenship, that's racism, and it's exactly the kind of behavior that has no place in any community I'm involved with." Angela stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades navigating corporate boardrooms and community organizations. "Karen," she said, her tone professional but unmistakably firm, "my husband and I have built our business on the principle of treating every person with dignity and respect. We've never discriminated against anyone based on their race, religion, or background. But we also don't tolerate tenants who create hostile environments for others or who engage in harassment and discrimination." The weight of Angela's words hit Karen like a sledgehammer. She was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about her confrontation with the Johnson family in the park. This was about her entire pattern of behavior, her history of complaints and conflicts with neighbors, and her reputation as someone who used her privilege as a weapon against people she considered beneath her. David Johnson had been watching the entire exchange with fascination and growing respect for his parents. As a recent graduate with a degree in business and social justice, he understood the broader implications of what was happening. This wasn't just a personal conflict. It was a perfect example of how systemic racism could be challenged when people of color gained economic power and used it responsibly. But Jasmine was thinking about the legal implications of the situation. As someone planning to attend law school with a focus on civil rights, she recognized that her father was walking a fine line between legitimate business concerns and potential retaliation. She caught his eye and gave him a subtle nod that said she understood the complexity of what he was navigating. Officer Rodriguez was beginning to realize that his role in this situation was evolving. What had started as a routine complaint call was now becoming something much more significant. He had witnessed clear evidence of racially motivated harassment, and he had a responsibility to document it properly. "Ms. Mitchell," Rodriguez said, pulling out his notepad, "I need to ask you some questions about your complaint today. When you called the police, what specific violations did you observe?" Karen looked around desperately, realizing that she was being backed into a corner with no way out. Every answer she could give would either reveal her racist motivations or prove that her complaint was baseless. "They were being loud," she said weakly, "and they were taking up too much space." Rodriguez looked at his notes. "Ma'am, when I arrived, I measured the sound level from their gathering at approximately 60 decibels, which is well within city noise ordinances for daytime park activities. And according to their permit, they're authorized to use this entire pavilion area. Can you be more specific about what violations you observed?" Karen's silence spoke volumes. She couldn't point to any specific violations because there hadn't been any. Her complaint had been based entirely on her belief that the Johnson family didn't belong in her neighborhood, and now that belief was being exposed for what it really was. Marcus watched Karen struggle with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because justice was finally being served, but sadness because he knew that Karen's attitudes were shared by far too many people in positions of privilege and power. "Karen," he said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "I want you to understand something. The building where you live isn't just another property in our portfolio. It's part of a community that we're trying to build. A place where people of all backgrounds can live together with mutual respect and dignity. Your behavior today tells me that you don't share those values." The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Karen's lease was up for renewal in 6 months, and her behavior today had just given Marcus every reason he needed to decline that renewal. But here's where the story takes another unexpected turn, because Marcus Johnson was about to do something that would surprise everyone present, including his own family. He was about to demonstrate the kind of grace and wisdom that separates true leaders from people who simply have power. "Karen Indy," he continued, his voice softening slightly, "I'm not going to use my position as your landlord to retaliate against you for what happened here today. That would make me no better than the people who have used their power to discriminate against me and my family over the years." Karen looked up in shock, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "But," Marcus continued, his voice becoming firm again, "I am going to require you to do something that might actually help you become a better person and a better neighbor." Angela smiled slightly, recognizing the approach her husband was taking. This was Marcus at his best, finding a way to turn a negative situation into an opportunity for growth and education. "What do you mean?" Karen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found what he was looking for. "There's a community organization called Building Bridges that works to bring people together across racial and cultural lines," he said. "They offer workshops on unconscious bias, cultural competency, and community building. I'm going to require you to attend their 8-week program as a condition of your lease renewal." Karen's mouth fell open. She had expected to be evicted, sued, or publicly humiliated. She had never imagined that her punishment would be education. "And," Marcus continued, "I'm going to require you to volunteer 20 hours at the Maplewood Community Center, helping with their after-school program for kids from all backgrounds. You need to understand that the people you tried to drive away from this park today are the same people who make this community strong and vibrant." Officer Rodriguez was taking notes furiously, documenting what was turning out to be one of the most unusual resolutions he had ever witnessed. Instead of escalating the conflict or using his power for revenge, Marcus was creating an opportunity for genuine change and growth. Angela stepped forward again, her voice carrying the warmth of someone who genuinely believed in the possibility of redemption. "Karen," she said, "we're not doing this to punish you. We're doing this because we believe that people can change when they're given the right opportunities and support. You made a mistake today, but that mistake doesn't have to define who you are for the rest of your life." Karen felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as the full weight of what had happened began to sink in. She had spent so many years building walls between herself and people who were different from her, and now she was being offered a chance to tear those walls down. "I don't understand," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Why would you help me after what I did to you?" Marcus looked at his family, drawing strength from their presence and their shared values. "Because, Karen, that's what good neighbors do. They help each other become better people. And because my children are watching this conversation, and I want them to see that we respond to hatred with education, to prejudice with patience, and to ignorance with opportunity. David and Jasmine exchanged proud looks as they watched their father demonstrate the principles he had taught them throughout their lives. This was leadership in action, the kind of moral courage that created real change in the world. But the story isn't over yet, because Karen Mitchell was about to make a choice that would determine not just her future housing situation, but the kind of person she wanted to be for the rest of her life. Karen looked around at the faces surrounding her. Officer Rodriguez, who had treated her fairly despite her obvious prejudice. Angela Johnson, who was offering her grace she didn't deserve. Marcus Johnson, who was giving her an opportunity to grow instead of simply punishing her for her mistakes. And the Johnson children, who were watching to see how adults handle conflict and injustice. For the first time in years, Karen saw herself clearly, and she didn't like what she saw. She saw a woman who had allowed fear and prejudice to poison her relationships with her neighbors. She saw someone who had used her privilege as a weapon instead of a tool for building community. She saw a person who had become exactly the kind of neighbor she wouldn't want to live next to. "I accept," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the sounds of the park around them. Marcus nodded, his expression serious, but not unkind. "Good. I'll have my assistant send you the contact information for building bridges, and we'll arrange for you to start volunteering at the community center next week." Karen nodded, still struggling to process the dramatic turn her day had taken. She had woken up that morning as a woman who thought she had the right to police who belonged in her neighborhood. She was going to bed that night as someone who had been given a chance to learn what community really meant. Officer Rodriguez closed his notepad and looked around at the group. "This has been one of the most educational calls I've responded to in my 15 years on the force," he said. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, thank you for handling this situation with such grace and wisdom. Ms. Mitchell, I hope you take advantage of the opportunity you've been given here today." As Rodriguez walked back to his patrol car, Karen stood awkwardly for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The Johnson family had returned to their barbecue, and the normal sounds of the park were beginning to resume around them. "Marcus," Karen said, her voice hesitant, "I want you to know that I'm sorry. Not just because you turned out to be my landlord, but because what I did was wrong regardless of who you are." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, measuring the sincerity in her voice. "Apology accepted, Karen," he said, "but the real test isn't what you say today. It's what you do over the next few months. Actions speak louder than words, and I'll be watching to see if you're serious about changing." Karen nodded and began walking back toward her house, her mind reeling with everything that had happened. As she walked, she could hear the Johnson family resuming their celebration, the sound of their laughter carrying across the park like a reminder of everything she had almost destroyed with her prejudice. But this story has one more twist that will leave you absolutely speechless. Because as Karen walked away, she had no idea that her encounter with the Johnson family was about to become much more than just a personal learning experience. Marcus pulled out his phone and made another call, this time to the producer of a local television news program who had been looking for stories about successful minority-owned businesses in the community. "Hi, Janet," Marcus said into the phone. "This is Marcus Johnson from Johnson Property Solutions. I think I have a story you might be interested in covering. It's about second chances, community building, and what happens when people choose education over retaliation." Within an hour, a news crew was setting up in Maplewood Park, preparing to film a segment about the Johnson family's approach to conflict resolution and community building. The story would air that evening, reaching thousands of viewers who would learn about the power of responding to hatred with grace and wisdom. But the real impact of the story wouldn't be measured in television ratings or social media shares. It would be measured in the changes that Karen Mitchell would make over the following months, and in the example that the Johnson family had set for their children and their community. 6 months later, Karen would complete her program at Building Bridges and her volunteer hours at the community center. She would discover that the children she had been afraid of were actually brilliant, funny, and kind young people who had taught her more about resilience and hope than she had ever imagined possible. She would also discover that the Johnson family had quietly been supporting dozens of community programs, from scholarship funds for underprivileged students to small business loans for minority entrepreneurs. The people she had tried to drive away from the park were actually the ones making her neighborhood a better place to live. And when her lease came up for renewal, Marcus Johnson would offer her a new contract without hesitation, because Karen Mitchell had proven that people really can change when they're given the opportunity and support to do so. The Johnson family's barbecue that day had lasted until sunset, filled with laughter, good food, and the satisfaction that comes from handling a difficult situation with dignity and grace. As they packed up their equipment and cleaned their area, Marcus reflected on the lessons his children had learned that day about standing up for what's right, while still believing in the possibility of redemption. Angela squeezed her husband's hand as they walked back to their car, proud of the man she had married and the family they had built together. David and Jasmine talked excitedly about the day's events, already planning ways to incorporate the lessons they had learned into their own future careers in social justice and community development. And somewhere across town, Karen Mitchell sat in her apartment, reading the materials from Building Bridges and thinking about the kind of neighbor she wanted to be. For the first time in years, she felt hopeful about the future and excited about the possibility of building real relationships with the people around her. The story of what happened in Maplewood Park that day would be told and retold throughout the community, becoming a powerful example of how ordinary people can choose to respond to conflict with wisdom, grace, and a commitment to building bridges instead of walls. If this story has moved you, if it's made you think about your own assumptions and prejudices, then I want you to do something right now. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Because the only way we create real change in our communities is by having these difficult conversations and choosing to see the humanity in every person we encounter. The world needs more Marcus Johnsons, people who use their success and influence to lift others up instead of tear them down. But it also needs more people like Karen Mitchell, who are willing to admit their mistakes and do the hard work of becoming better neighbors and better human beings. What would you have done in Marcus's position? Would you have shown the same grace and wisdom, or would you have used your power differently? Leave a comment and let me know, because your voice matters in this conversation about justice, forgiveness, and the possibility of redemption. Remember, every interaction we have is an opportunity to build bridges or tear them down. Every moment of conflict is a chance to choose education over retaliation, understanding over judgment, and hope over fear. The choice is always ours, and the impact of that choice ripples out far beyond what we can imagine. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for being part of a community that believes in the power of stories to change hearts and minds. Until next time, keep building bridges, keep choosing grace, and keep believing in the possibility that tomorrow can be better than today.